Have you ever walked out to your garden, looked at what seemed like a perfectly healthy tomato or pepper, only to find a black, sunken patch growing on the very bottom of the fruit? At first, it looks like a bruise. A few days later, it turns into a leathery black scar. Soon after that, the entire tomato is ruined. Most gardeners immediately think it's a disease. Others assume insects have been chewing on the fruit. Some rush to spray fungicides, insecticides, or every miracle product they can find at the garden center. But none of those will fix the problem. Because blossom end rot isn't caused by a fungus. It isn't caused by bacteria. And it certainly isn't caused by insects. It's usually a calcium problem. Or more accurately, a problem with the plant's ability to move calcium where it needs it most. Today I'm going to show you one of the oldest homemade calcium fertilizers gardeners have been making for generations. It starts with something most people throw into the trash every single morning: eggshells. But here's the part most people get completely wrong. Simply crushing eggshells into your garden does almost nothing to help a plant that's already struggling. Yes, eggshells contain a tremendous amount of calcium, but that calcium is locked inside a material that breaks down incredibly slowly. Depending on your soil, those shells can sit there for months or even years before the plant can actually use them. If your tomatoes are developing blossom end rot right now, they don't have years. They need available calcium now. That's where vinegar changes everything. When you combine toasted eggshells with vinegar, a simple chemical reaction transforms that locked-up calcium into a completely water-soluble form that plants can absorb much more quickly. I'll show you exactly how to make it. I'll explain why it works. I'll show you the safest way to prepare it. We'll cover the exact dilution ratios, the fastest way to apply it, the biggest mistake almost everyone makes while mixing it. And perhaps most importantly, I'll explain why this homemade fertilizer sometimes doesn't solve blossom end rot at all, even when the chemistry is perfect. Because there is one hidden cause of blossom end rot that catches thousands of gardeners every single summer. We'll get to that shortly. But first, before we dive into today's video, I have a major announcement. The gardening guide you've been writing to me about for months is finally here. The Plant Once Garden is officially out. You have been incredibly patient with me while I took the time to get this right. It is approximately 150 pages of everything this channel teaches, gathered into one complete reference, designed with a hand-drawn heritage cover and warm cream pages that feel like a guide your grandmother would have owned. Inside, you'll find the 90 perennial plants that come back every year with almost no labor, 6 complete garden plans, the no-labor planting calendar, and the hydrogen peroxide method explained completely. I've also included the specific perennials that bring hummingbirds singing and dancing right outside your window, the chapter on what your garden becomes over 20 years, and the mistakes that kill perennials. This is a reference you can lean on for the rest of your gardening life. You can scan the QR code on your screen right now, or click the link in the pinned comment or description below to get your copy. Thank you again for your patience. Now, back to the garden. Let's begin with the question that confuses almost everyone. Is blossom end rot actually caused by a lack of calcium? The answer is yes and no. That probably sounds confusing, but once you understand what's happening inside the plant, everything starts to make sense. Calcium is one of the building blocks a plant uses to create strong cell walls. Think of it as the concrete inside a building. Without enough concrete, the walls collapse. Without enough calcium, the plant can't build healthy new tissue. Here's something many gardeners don't realize. Unlike nitrogen or potassium, calcium is what botanists call an immobile nutrient. That simply means once calcium reaches one part of the plant, it stays there. The plant can't move it somewhere else later. For example, if a tomato plant runs low on nitrogen, it can steal nitrogen from its older leaves and move it into the new growth. Calcium doesn't work that way. Once it's locked into an older leaf, it stays there forever. That's why calcium deficiencies always show up in the fastest growing parts of the plant first. The youngest leaves, the blossoms, and especially the developing fruit. Those rapidly expanding cells need a constant supply of calcium every single day. If that supply stops, even briefly, the cells begin collapsing. That's when blossom end rot begins. The very first sign is easy to miss. You'll notice a tiny water-soaked spot forming on the blossom end of the fruit. Not near the stem, the opposite end. At first, it almost looks like someone pressed a thumb against the tomato. Many gardeners ignore it because it seems harmless. But over the next several days, that little spot becomes darker. It starts sinking into the fruit. Eventually, it turns into that familiar leathery black patch that every tomato grower dreads. By this point, the damage is permanent. And this leads to one of the biggest misconceptions in gardening. Many people think if they add calcium immediately, that damaged tomato will recover. It won't. Once blossom end rot appears on an individual fruit, that fruit cannot heal itself. The cells have already collapsed. No fertilizer, no spray, no homemade remedy, no commercial product can rebuild tissue that's already been destroyed. That tomato is finished. The best thing you can do is remove it from the plant as soon as you notice the damage. Don't leave it hanging there. It's never going to become healthy again. Instead, let the plant stop wasting energy on ruined fruit and redirect those nutrients toward producing healthy new tomatoes. This is actually one of the biggest mistakes beginners make. They leave every damaged tomato on the vine, hoping it'll somehow recover. It never does. Experienced gardeners remove them immediately. Not because they're impatient, because they understand where the plant should be investing its energy. Now here's the encouraging news. While you can't save the damaged fruit, you absolutely can prevent the next wave of tomatoes from developing the same problem. That's where water-soluble calcium becomes useful. But before we start mixing eggshells and vinegar together, there's something important you need to understand. Eggshells are packed with calcium, but simply throwing crushed shells into the soil isn't the quick fix many YouTube videos claim it is. In fact, you could bury a handful of eggshells today, and months from now they might still look almost exactly the same. So why is that? That's exactly what we're going to cover next. Because once you understand the chemistry behind eggshells, the vinegar method suddenly makes perfect sense. So why don't crushed eggshells solve blossom end rot quickly? After all, they're almost pure calcium. The answer comes down to the form that calcium is locked inside. An eggshell is made primarily of calcium carbonate. It's an incredibly stable material. That's exactly why eggs protect a developing chick so well. They're designed to be tough. They're designed to resist breaking down. That's great for nature. Not so great if you're trying to feed a tomato plant that's already showing signs of calcium stress. Many gardeners faithfully save eggshells all winter. They crush them. They sprinkle them around tomatoes every spring. And they're surprised when blossom end rot still shows up. The problem isn't that eggshells don't contain calcium. They absolutely do. The problem is that the calcium isn't immediately available. Soil microbes, moisture, temperature, and time all have to work together before that calcium can slowly become available to plant roots. Sometimes that process takes many months. Sometimes it takes much longer. Your tomato plant doesn't have that kind of time. It needs calcium while the fruit is actively growing. That's where vinegar changes everything. When calcium carbonate comes into contact with acetic acid, the acid found in vinegar, a chemical reaction begins immediately. If you've never seen it before, it's actually pretty impressive. The mixture starts bubbling almost instantly. Those bubbles aren't the calcium escaping, they're carbon dioxide gas being released as the vinegar reacts with the shell. While that reaction is happening, something much more important is taking place. The calcium locked inside the shell is being converted into calcium acetate. Unlike calcium carbonate, calcium acetate dissolves completely in water. That means once it's properly diluted, your plant can absorb it much more readily than waiting for whole eggshells to slowly decompose in the garden. That's why this method has been used for generations in natural farming. It isn't magic. It isn't a miracle cure. It's simply basic chemistry. Now let's make it. Fortunately, there isn't much. You'll need about 10 to 12 eggshells. White vinegar works perfectly. Apple cider vinegar works too. A clean glass jar, a skillet or baking tray, and something to strain the finished liquid. That's it. No expensive ingredients. No specialized equipment. Now let's begin with the step that many online tutorials completely skip. Start by washing your eggshells thoroughly. You want to remove any remaining egg white or membrane. Once they're clean, let them dry completely. Now crush them into smaller pieces. They don't need to become powder. Breaking them into several pieces each is plenty. Next, place them into a dry skillet over medium heat. You can also spread them on a baking tray and bake them in the oven. Either method works. Toast the shells until they develop a light tan or light brown color. Not black, not burned, just lightly browned. Why bother doing this? There are actually two important reasons. First, you're removing any remaining organic material that could spoil while the shells sit in vinegar for over a week. Second, you're sanitizing the shells. That simple step produces a much cleaner final product. Some gardeners also believe the gentle heating makes the shells slightly more brittle, helping the vinegar react more efficiently. Regardless, this is one step that's well worth the extra few minutes. Once they're toasted, allow them to cool before moving to the next step. Place your toasted shells into a clean glass jar. Now slowly pour the vinegar over them. For casual backyard gardening, the easiest guideline is a 10-to-1 ratio. If your crushed eggshells occupy roughly 1 inch inside the jar, add about 10 inches of vinegar. If you prefer precision, use the traditional natural farming ratio. 1 part toasted eggshells to 10 parts vinegar by weight. For example, 50 grams of toasted shells, 500 grams of vinegar. Using that ratio allows almost all of the calcium carbonate to react, without leaving unnecessary excess acid behind. Is absolute precision required? Not really. The simple 10-to-1 guideline works perfectly well for most home gardeners. But if you enjoy measuring ingredients accurately, the weight ratio produces a very consistent concentrate every time. The moment the vinegar touches the shells, you'll hear it. Fizz, bubble, foam, sometimes surprisingly vigorously. That's exactly what you want. The reaction has begun. And now we need to talk about one of the most important safety warnings in this entire video. This cannot be overstated. Do not screw a tight lid onto the jar immediately after mixing. The bubbling you're seeing is carbon dioxide gas. That gas has to escape. If you trap it inside a sealed glass jar, pressure builds rapidly. In extreme cases, enough pressure can build to crack, or even shatter, the container. It's completely avoidable. Instead, loosely cover the jar with a paper towel, coffee filter, or clean cloth, held in place with a rubber band. That keeps dust and insects out, while allowing the gas to escape safely. If you're using a lid, leave it sitting loosely on top without tightening it. For at least the first 48 hours, never seal it airtight. Once the vigorous reaction has completely finished, storing it with a proper lid is perfectly fine. But during those first couple of days, always give the gas somewhere to go. It's a simple precaution that prevents a potentially dangerous mess. Once everything is mixed, place the jar somewhere cool and out of direct sunlight. A pantry works well. A garage shelf works well. A cupboard works well. Now, leave it alone. This is one of those projects that rewards patience. Over the next several days, you'll notice the bubbling gradually slow down. Eventually, it almost disappears. By around 7 to 10 days, the reaction is usually complete. How do you know? Simple. The bubbling has stopped completely. The shells settle quietly to the bottom. Nothing is happening anymore. At that point, nearly all of the reaction you're waiting for has finished. There's no advantage to rushing it. Give the chemistry time to do its job. Once the bubbling has completely stopped, strain the liquid into a clean bottle or storage container. The remaining shell fragments have already given up most of the calcium they're going to release. You can discard them or add them to your compost pile. What you're left with is your concentrated water-soluble calcium fertilizer. Notice one important word there: concentrated. This is not something you pour directly onto your plants. Doing that can create more problems than it solves. It always needs to be diluted first. Exactly how much? We'll cover the ideal dilution ratio in just a moment. But before we do, there's another application method that many gardeners overlook completely. And in some situations, it may actually deliver calcium to your plants faster than watering the soil alone. By the way, if you're looking to completely transform your yard into a low-maintenance paradise, don't forget that my full reference guide, The Plant Once Garden, is now officially available. It's 150 pages, covering all the perennial foundations and permanent setups we talk about on this channel. You can scan the QR code right here on the screen, or find the link in the pinned comment below to grab your copy. Now, let's get right back into today's topic. Now that your concentrate is finished, let's talk about the most important step: using it correctly. This is where many gardeners accidentally make another mistake. They assume that if a little calcium is good, then more calcium must be even better. Unfortunately, plants don't work that way. Remember, what you've made is a concentrate. It always needs to be diluted before it touches your garden. The simplest ratio is 1 to 2 tablespoons of your calcium concentrate per gallon of water. Stir it well. That's it. Now it's ready to use. The best application method for most gardeners is a soil drench. Simply pour the diluted solution slowly around the base of the plant. Don't dump it all in one spot. Allow it to soak into the root zone where the feeder roots are actively absorbing water. Applying it once each week is usually more than enough while your plant is actively setting fruit. You don't need to use it every day. More frequent applications won't force the plant to absorb more calcium. Healthy roots, steady moisture, and proper watering are still doing most of the work. The calcium solution is simply giving the plant access to an immediately available source of calcium while new fruit is developing. But there is another application method that's often overlooked, and under certain conditions, it can be extremely useful. Most gardeners only think about feeding plants through the roots. That's certainly the traditional approach. But leaves can absorb certain nutrients too. Because this calcium acetate dissolves completely in water, many gardeners also use it as a foliar spray. Instead of pouring it into a watering can, pour the same diluted mixture into a clean spray bottle. Mist the leaves until they're lightly coated. Don't soak them until they're dripping. A light, even coating is all you're after. Pay particular attention to the youngest leaves near the top of the plant. Those are the areas where calcium shortages usually appear first. If the plant has tiny developing fruit, you can lightly mist those as well. Timing matters. Always spray early in the morning or late in the evening. Never spray during the hottest part of the day. Bright afternoon sunlight combined with wet leaves can increase plant stress and cause unnecessary leaf damage. Morning is usually ideal. The leaves have time to absorb moisture before the day's heat arrives. Now it's important to set realistic expectations. Foliar feeding can provide nutrients to leaves and nearby growing tissue. However, blossom end rot is primarily a problem of calcium transport inside the plant, not simply calcium sitting on the fruit. A foliar spray can be a useful supplement, especially on young growth, but it should not replace consistent watering and healthy root uptake. Think of it as another tool in your toolbox, not the entire solution. And that brings us to the biggest misunderstanding surrounding blossom end rot. Here's something that surprises many people. A plant can be growing in soil that's full of calcium and still develop blossom end rot. How is that possible? Because calcium doesn't move through the plant on its own. It travels with water. No water movement, no calcium movement. That's why blossom end rot is so often connected to inconsistent watering. Imagine this. For several days, the soil becomes bone dry. The roots are stressed. Water uptake slows dramatically. Then suddenly, a heavy thunderstorm arrives. Or the gardener gives the plant an enormous soaking after letting it wilt. That constant cycle of drying out, then flooding, then drying again, interrupts the plant's ability to move calcium to the developing fruit. Even though plenty of calcium may already be sitting in the soil, the plant simply can't transport it fast enough. That's why experienced gardeners don't immediately reach for fertilizer. The first thing they ask is, has this plant been watered consistently? Very often the answer explains everything. The goal isn't to keep the soil soaking wet. It's to keep soil moisture consistent, not desert dry, not swampy, just evenly moist. Mulch helps tremendously with this. A 2 to 3 inch layer of organic mulch slows evaporation, keeps the soil cooler, and helps maintain more stable moisture levels between waterings. Combined with deep watering instead of frequent shallow watering, you've already solved half the problem. Think of the calcium fertilizer as supplying the building material. Consistent watering is the delivery truck. Without the truck, the building materials never arrive. The earlier you catch calcium stress, the easier it is to correct the conditions before more fruit is affected. Most beginners focus on the mature tomatoes. Experienced gardeners look somewhere else first. They watch the newest growth. Let's start with the fruit. The earliest symptom is almost always found on the blossom end. That's the bottom of the tomato or pepper. Not the stem end, not the side. The bottom. Initially, you'll see a tiny pale or water-soaked spot. It almost looks wet. Some gardeners mistake it for insect damage. Others assume the fruit was bruised. Within a few days, that spot darkens. It becomes sunken. Eventually, it develops into the familiar leathery brown or black patch. Sometimes the fruit even starts ripening much earlier than expected. You may see a tomato turning red while it's still unusually small. When you turn it over, there's the black spot. Unfortunately, once you see that stage, that particular tomato is already beyond saving. Remove it. Let the plant focus its energy elsewhere. Now let's move to the leaves. Remember earlier when we talked about calcium being an immobile nutrient? Because the plant can't pull calcium from older leaves, the youngest growth always suffers first. Look at the very top of your plant. Healthy new leaves should unfold smoothly. If calcium transport is being interrupted, those fresh leaves often become distorted. They may curl downward like a claw. Some cup inward. Others twist into unusual shapes. Instead of opening flat, they remain crinkled or puckered. Sometimes the leaf edges begin looking scorched or brittle. The lower leaves often remain perfectly healthy. That's one of the clues that separates calcium problems from many other nutrient deficiencies. It's the newest growth that's struggling, not the oldest. You may also notice blossoms dropping before fruit ever forms. Flowers appear, turn yellow, then simply fall off. That doesn't automatically mean calcium is the only issue. Heat stress can cause blossom drop too. But when you combine blossom drop with distorted new growth and early blossom end rot, it's time to pay much closer attention to calcium availability and watering practices. One thing experienced gardeners learn over time is that plants rarely struggle without giving environmental clues first. Sometimes the weather tells you what's about to happen before the plant ever does. Think about the beginning of a heat wave. For several weeks, everything looks perfect. The tomatoes are growing beautifully. The peppers are loaded with flowers. Then suddenly, temperatures jump dramatically. The plant begins losing water much faster than its roots can replace it, even if the soil contains calcium. The demand inside the plant suddenly outpaces delivery. That's when blossom end rot often begins appearing on the newest fruit. The same thing happens after the classic dry-then-drenched cycle. The soil dries until cracks begin forming. Then heavy rain arrives, or the gardener floods the bed trying to make up for lost time. That roller coaster of moisture is exactly what interrupts calcium transport. Experienced gardeners know they can't control the weather, but they can control how consistently they water between those weather extremes, and that often makes all the difference. In fact, there's one simple habit that prevents more cases of blossom end rot than almost any fertilizer you'll ever use. So what's the single best habit you can develop if you want to prevent blossom end rot? It's surprisingly simple. Stop watering on a schedule. Instead, start watering according to your soil. Many gardeners water every evening because that's what they've always done. Others water every Saturday because it's convenient. The problem is that plants don't care what day it is. They respond to moisture. Some weeks your garden may need watering twice. Another week, a slow soaking rain may provide everything your plants need. If you blindly follow the calendar, you'll almost always overwater or underwater sooner or later. Instead, check the soil first. Push your finger a couple of inches into the ground. If it's still moist beneath the surface, wait. If it's dry, water deeply. Not for 30 seconds. Not just enough to wet the surface. Water long enough for moisture to reach deep into the root zone. Deep watering encourages deeper roots. Deeper roots are far more resilient during hot weather. Shallow watering does exactly the opposite. It teaches the roots to stay near the surface where the soil dries out first. Then the first hot afternoon arrives. The plant becomes stressed. Water movement slows, and blossom end rot isn't far behind. It's amazing how many problems disappear simply by improving watering habits. Now, before we finish, let's quickly clear up a few common myths that continue circulating every gardening season. If I bury eggshells around my tomato plants, blossom end rot will disappear. Not anytime soon. Eventually, those shells may contribute calcium back into the soil. That's certainly a good long-term practice. But they're not going to release significant amounts of calcium fast enough to rescue fruit that's developing right now. Think of raw eggshells as a slow investment. The vinegar method is designed to make that calcium available much sooner. Every blossom end rot problem means my soil has no calcium. Again, not necessarily. Many garden soils already contain plenty of calcium. The real issue is often interrupted calcium movement caused by inconsistent watering, damaged roots, excessive heat, or rapid plant growth. That's why simply dumping more calcium into the soil doesn't always solve the problem. You have to fix the reason the plant isn't moving calcium in the first place. More fertilizer will fix blossom end rot. Actually, too much fertilizer can sometimes make things worse. Heavy nitrogen applications encourage rapid leafy growth. That extra growth demands even more water. If the root system can't keep up, calcium transport becomes even more difficult. Healthy plants aren't built by forcing fast growth. They're built by maintaining healthy roots. Once one tomato gets blossom end rot, the whole plant is ruined. Thankfully, that's completely false. One damaged tomato doesn't mean the season is over. In fact, many gardeners lose only the first few fruits of the season. Once watering becomes consistent and calcium movement improves, every new tomato that develops afterward can be perfectly healthy. That's why you should never give up after seeing blossom end rot appear. Treat it as a warning, not a death sentence. One thing I've learned over the years is that experienced gardeners rarely chase problems. They prevent them. They don't wait until half the crop is damaged before checking their watering. They don't ignore tiny warning signs on young fruit. They don't assume every problem requires buying another bottle of fertilizer. Instead, they observe. They pay attention to the weather. They notice when the soil begins drying faster than usual. They recognize distorted young leaves before fruit ever develops. They understand that gardening isn't about reacting. It's about staying one step ahead. That's exactly why homemade remedies like this work best when they're part of an overall gardening routine. The eggshell and vinegar mixture is a useful tool, a very useful one. But it isn't magic. It's one piece of a much larger picture. Healthy soil, healthy roots, consistent watering, proper mulch, good drainage, steady plant growth. Those are the things that truly prevent blossom end rot year after year. The calcium simply supports that process. Here's the complete process from beginning to end. Save and wash about 10 to 12 eggshells. Toast them lightly in a dry skillet or oven until they become light brown. Place the toasted shells into a clean glass jar. Add vinegar using roughly a 1 to 10 ratio, or 1 part shells to 10 parts vinegar by weight, if you prefer precision. Leave the container loosely covered. Never seal it tightly during the first couple of days, because the reaction produces carbon dioxide gas that needs somewhere to escape. Allow the mixture to react for 7 to 10 days until all bubbling stops. Strain the liquid. Store your concentrate in a clean bottle. When you're ready to use it, dilute 1 to 2 tablespoons into 1 gallon of water. Apply it around the base of the plant once each week while new fruit is developing. If you choose to use it as a foliar spray, use the same diluted mixture. Spray lightly during the early morning or late evening, never during the heat of the day. At the same time, maintain even soil moisture. Avoid allowing the soil to swing from bone dry to soaking wet. Use mulch to reduce evaporation. And remember, if a tomato already has a black leathery patch on the bottom, remove it. That fruit cannot recover. Your goal is protecting the next tomatoes that haven't developed yet. Those are the ones this method is designed to help. Here's something I hope you'll remember long after this video is over. Gardening is rarely about finding one miracle product. It's usually about understanding why a plant is struggling. Once you understand the cause, the solution often becomes surprisingly simple. Blossom end rot looks frightening the first time you see it. But now you know exactly what you're looking at. You know why it happens. You know how to make a fast-acting, water-soluble calcium fertilizer from ordinary eggshells and vinegar. You know how to apply it safely. And most importantly, you know that consistent watering is often the difference between a plant that produces basket after basket of beautiful tomatoes and one that struggles all summer long. Once you understand that relationship between water and calcium, you've solved one of the most common frustrations in vegetable gardening. If you're ready to stop wasting time on plants that die every winter and finally build a garden that takes care of itself, don't forget to grab your copy of The Plant Once Garden. It's 150 pages of everything this channel teaches, completely mapped out for you. Inside you'll find the perennial plants that return year after year, complete garden plans, planting calendars, the hydrogen peroxide method explained in full, and the long-term strategies that help you create a beautiful, low-maintenance garden. Just scan the QR code on your screen right now, or click the link in the description below to get started. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.